I personally love that it doesn't need to shout about its performance credentials. You've just got this little bit of subtle red lipstick just to flirt with you, to let you know it's something a little bit special.
At risk of spoiling my mechanic bit in this video, these are actually pretty good. Probably better than you're expecting, but they're not perfect though.
This has always been my favorite Golf GTI, and I have a theory of why that is. Okay, do you want an absolute bargain of a performance car? Arguably one of the greatest hot hatches that has ever existed, and quite possibly a future classic? The Mark V GTI might be that car. Although Volkswagen do have a bit of a questionable reputation when it comes to build quality and reliability, plus these things are pushing 20 years old, so is buying a used one actually a really stupid idea? I tell you what, how about once and for all we work out if you should buy a used Mark V Golf GTI? That obviously means digging into the good, the bad and the ugly. Let's start with the ugly. The Golf GTI has always been the, let's say the stylish European hot hatch of this segment, but I tell you what, nothing detracts from a sense of premium like the roof caving in on you. Okay, that's a little bit extreme, but the roof lining kind of turning into an upside down parachute like an old Ford Falcon, yeah, that can be a thing. And it's not just the roof lining, the door trims can get a little bit loosey-goosey too, see? Just like that. The seats, they're all sexy and sculptured, and look, the overall ergonomics are absolutely spot on. Driving position, great. In fact, I'll go as far as saying these seats might be about as close to perfection as you're going to find. However, the aggressive bolsters may have seen better days. They can get a little bit overly squidgy, and also the leather, especially on the full leather models, if that's not cared for, it can crack or get all shiny or just get all wrinkly and gross like an old man's ball. On the subject of things being soft, any of the soft touch surfaces can degrade and become a bit sticky and gross, but there are plenty of solutions to this. You can replace it all with aftermarket parts or just strip it back and refinish it yourself. Now, I should mention that according to the owners that have really cared for these cars, especially the interiors, just like Jamie has done with his GTI, the resilience is actually quite good. Like in this car, all the fabrics feel really good, the bolsters are good, all of these surfaces feel really, really nice. So they can last if they're cared for. But other ugly things, the headlights and the tail lights can become cloudy, but this is so easily fixed. There are plenty of tutorials online and great advice on the owners group. Actually, owners groups on these, brilliant. However, the seals for the tail lights, they can perish and let moisture in. And if the tail lights start trying to imitate the main stage at Tomorrowland, or the boot refuses to open, it might be the wiring loom up here kind of twisting on itself, and that can create all sorts of electrical dramas in the tailgate. There are some other electrical dramas we need to discuss as well, but we'll get to that shortly. For models with the stunning 18-inch Monza diamond cut wheels, look, these things are known to corrode and they can be expensive to replace, especially with the OEM wheels, although some wheel repairers can get it fixed for you. And then behind those wheels, just make sure that all the suspension components are at their best. These things are obviously renowned for their brilliant handling characteristics and just being such a fun car to drive, while also being an excellent daily driver. And in mint condition examples like this, they still absolutely nail that brief. But all of those lovely handling and driving characteristics can very quickly be ruined by things like worn or even broken springs, struts that are well past their use by date, and rear control arms that have just seized up. These are all known common issues. Also, these can be super sensitive to the wrong wheel alignment settings. Obviously, plenty have been lowered, and that can be an awesome thing as long as those suspension settings have been recalibrated for the lowered height, because the wrong alignment setting in one of these can just ruin the entire driving characteristics. And then we come to the dreaded rust issues, and especially for GTIs in cold climates. See, Volkswagen installed sort of foam inside these quarter panels to help with the NVH levels. The problem is the foam collects water and then it starts to corrode from the inside out. But there can be good news here. Depending on where you're watching this from, the car might still be covered under Volkswagen's corrosion warranty, so it'll get fixed up from the factory. But even if not, these panels are pretty cheap to replace. And also, if you do see one on the used market and the paint here doesn't quite match the rest of the car. It might not be accident damage, it might just be a fresh panel to fix the rust issue. And another corrosion issue can surround the funky rear opening latch here. This thing's bloody awesome. I love the design of it and it just works so intuitively. The problem can be that if water builds up in here, you can kind of get like a lime scale effect down the bottom there. Also, water can play havoc with the actual operation of it. Sometimes it'll get like stuck in the up position or it'll take forever to close like that. But to solve that, a bit of WD-40 should be sweet. Also, anything made of plastic or rubber can become brittle over time. Just check things like the mirror housings, the trim around the windscreen, the front grille, any of the plastics here really, the seals around the doors and the wiper blades. Also on the wiper blades, plenty of owners have complained about just how much Volkswagen try to charge for the OEM replacements. The same can be said for plenty of other car companies as well. But then some of the cheap aftermarket replacements are just crap. Instead, hit the WiperTech link below to get yourself 15% off and free express shipping on the only wiper blades we use because they are some of the best in the business. Go and get yourself a set. Although, don't do that if you're like Jamie and lend us your car to feature, because in that case, we're going to give you a set for free. To volunteer your car for us to feature, email me. My link's down below there. The brittle rubbers and plastics can extend inside as well. The air vents getting all kind of loose or just breaking, that's a common thing. The surround around the lighting selection switch, that breaking is known. Any of these like plastic lids like here and here, they can all break and fall apart. But good news is there are plenty of aftermarket parts to replace all this stuff, and chances are they're going to be cheaper than the OEM parts and they're probably going to last longer as well. But then some of the metal components in here can have some issues as well. The ignition barrel, try that a few times. Does it turn on smoothly? Does it turn off? Does it let the key back out? Because plenty of owners have had issues with this. But electronics in here, here's a hot tip. Push every single button, try every single function, make sure it actually works. Especially try all of the buttons on the steering wheel and every function and every possible setting with the air conditioning. These things are known to have compressor and condenser issues, and there can be electronic problems with the actual climate control panel itself. Please try it and make sure it works. And look, obviously the aircon should blow ice cold air, but if you can hear any grinding sounds or clunking sounds or really any kind of noises at all when you're changing between modes, not a good sign. Also, make sure that the power windows go up and down. Make sure that the power adjustments on the mirror actually work. And also make sure that when you lock and unlock the car, it locks and unlocks the way you want it to. But an area where I feel this car dominates all of the competition, and look, maybe I'm just getting old and sensible, is just in the way it looks. I personally love that it doesn't need to shout about its performance credentials. There's no stupid wings and vents and bits of shitty plastic stuck to it all over the place. You've just got this little bit of subtle red lipstick just to flirt with you, to let you know it's something a little bit special. But look, if the car is having all sorts of electronic issues, it might actually be an issue from higher up. I'm not talking about a deity, you silly sausage. It's not an act of God. I'm referring to the sunroofs. Luckily, this car doesn't have a sunroof because, as we've seen in many Volkswagens, a sunroof can mean a host of issues. See, owners have complained about grinding sounds as it's opening or closing, or no matter what position it's in, it just rattles like mad. Worst case scenario, you've got to replace the sunroof. That's going to be bloody expensive. But even if the sunroof is working perfectly, if the drainage channels aren't cleared all the time, that can create all sorts of water ingress issues, and then that can create all sorts of electronic dramas, and that can be a complete nightmare. But according to the owners, even when they are cleaned and cleared properly, you can still get water leakage issues from them. Look, a sunroof isn't necessarily a red flag when it comes to buying the car, but just know the thing's going to require the same kind of care and attention that you'd give to a brand new baby. Now look, no surprise with the age of these things, but when it comes to these standard infotainment systems, there are so many complaints about them. The screen's locking up or turning black or blue, or you've got to basically punch it to get anything to operate. The actual system itself is old and clunky and glitchy. For models that have got Bluetooth, so that's going to be the later edition models where the option box was ticked with Bluetooth, it's shit, it drops out all the time. They're just bloody terrible, but they're bloody old. But the actual sound systems aren't too bad. What I mean is that they have heaps of potential. If you add an amp or a sub or both, it can make a world of difference. Plus, updating all of this infotainment tech is so simple. In fact, there are entire subreddits dedicated to updating a Mark V Volkswagen infotainment system to latest later iterations of Volkswagen systems. Or you could do what Jamie has done with this car and fit a higher quality aftermarket screen with a matching fascia. This way you get the latest in Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. You can add a decent reversing camera to it, even parking sensors. And with the fascia kit, it can look pretty much factory fitted. Now, we've actually teamed up with our mates at Automotive Superstore to make a full video guide to all of this sort of stuff. The link for that video is down below. Plus, for whatever infotainment or suspension or engine parts or car accessory needs you have, check them out. They've got hundreds of thousands of products, and their Rego search tool on the website is ingenious. Type your Rego in, it'll tell you what parts are going to suit your car. Again, the link's down below. Check them out. They're legends. Now, here's a fun fact for you. 70% of all of these on the used market will have one of these, a DSG transmission. The rest obviously have the 6-speed manual. But this means that the majority of them out there can have a few DSG problems. Now look, Jim, our resident mechanic, will take you through all the mechanical issues in a second, but when you're test driving one of these, just make sure that the DSG is engaging properly. When you're pulling away, it shouldn't judder or vibrate at all. All the gears, they should select cleanly and accurately. If it's not doing that or it makes any weird mechanical sounds, yeah, not a good sign. And look, these early iterations of a DSG, they can be a bit grumpy around town. That is just sort of one of their characteristics. But if something mechanically doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Now here's another fun fact. Of all of the Mark V GTIs sold in Australia, less than 5% were one of these Pirelli editions. These come with extra power and torque, some colour-coded bodywork, and these delightful Pirelli edition wheels. See, it's a P for Pirelli, like a big P. And these half leather sports seats with the tyre tread pattern on the inserts and all the yellow stitching. And you know what? For me, it's just the right amount of special sauce. But that's what's always been so special about a GTI, is that it feels sporty and a bit special when you're sitting inside, but at the same time, it's totally practical and usable as an everyday car. For example, you've got storage here, you've got 2 cup holders here, and this one has the bottle opener kind of divider. These generally go missing. Great that this car actually has it. More storage under here, although that's not very big. You've got good sized glove box. More importantly, the glove box is felt lined, so nothing rattles around in there. Excellent sized door bins, and again, they've got like a carpeted bottom section, so nothing rattles around. You've got more storage under here. You've got a sunglasses holder just here. Notice how on this car, all of the plastic things actually work, so they can last. But up front, I think it's pretty good practicality. And then in terms of safety, look, obviously no autonomous tech, but plenty of airbags and all the usual traction and stability control kind of stuff. It received a 5-star safety rating when it was brand new, so it's, yeah, relatively safe. Plus, remember, these were at the very pointy end of the Golf range. So when it comes to features and equipment, it has pretty much everything you're going to need for an excellent daily driver. We're talking dual zone climate control, cruise control, auto wipers and lights. And normally we'd recommend you try to find a fully optioned example. But maybe don't do that because, as we know, the sunroofs can cause all sorts of disasters. The directional bi-xenon headlights and the washers, they can play up. And the sat-nav and the display, they're just shit. And then in the back seat, I'm exactly 10 centimeters taller than famous Mark V Golf GTI former owner and Formula One driver and my better half's hall pass, Carlos Sainz Jr. This is in my driving position, and pretty bloody good for a car in this class. Good amount of footroom, knees aren't scrubbing too much. The seats are on the firm side. I reckon if more people sat back here, they'd kind of squidge up a bit and be a little bit more supportive, but they're pretty firm. Also, I do really like this Pirelli tread pattern fabric, but for me, it's got to be the tartan fabric. I reckon that looks so cool. That's peak GTI. But as far as features and practicality back here, you've got your own air vents, you've got cup holders hiding under here. Also, they've got little clawy things, so if you're like me and you enjoy a small pretentious coffee, it won't go flying about the cabin when you're carving up some corners. Okay sized door bins, pockets behind the seats, and you've got a pull down armrest, which is like a bit of a workout, but once it's down, it's very comfortable. And then as far as practicality in the boot goes, pretty bloody good. It can't match a Civic Type R, we're talking in cars in this class. That thing with its magic seats pretty much blows every other car in this class out of the water. But this is pretty much on par with the Focus ST or XR5 Turbo and the Mazda 3 MPS, or Mazda Speed 3 if you're watching this internationally. But the seats, they don't fold completely flat. That's just a bit bloody annoying. Also, when you're in the market for these, make sure it comes with the parcel shelf, because on the flip side, you get this cool netting, and replacements of these aren't all that cheap. I just think the whole thing's really smart and sophisticated to look at. Also, Is it just me, or do you think that really well-kept examples like this are just looking better and better with age? With really shitty mods, or when they're completely neglected, they can look like a dog's breakfast, but it's just becoming such a handsome-looking car. And they are so enjoyable to drive, especially when it's one of these Pirellis with that little bit of extra hot sauce. Now look, I understand that all the more modern iterations of Golf GTI are faster than this, and they're more refined, and technically they are superior cars, but this has always been my favorite Golf GTI, and I have a theory of why that is. See, these were sold at a time before YouTube or even social media really blew up. So things like Nürburgring and quarter mile times just simply weren't important. Back then, Volkswagen didn't need to set the internet alight with whatever performance times the car was capable of. All they needed to do was produce a car that was relatively sensible to drive, that also made whoever was behind the wheel giggle like a schoolgirl every time you got to a corner or a roundabout, and they absolutely nailed it. I just think that now marketing departments are so reliant on being able to publish cars' performance figures, and especially the new Golf GTI and Golf R, the compromise to that is that, yeah, okay, they've made the cars faster, but they're not actually more fun. This is the more fun one to drive. It just feels more raw and visceral, but like in the best possible way, because you feel like you're part of the machine. It's not just a bunch of computers driving the car for you. I mean, my biggest issue with the current crop of fast Golfs is that when you're driving at normal speeds like this, which is what you're going to be doing 99% of the time, they don't feel special. They just feel like every other Golf, including the base models. This one, it doesn't. There is something more special going on. There's some sort of, I don't know, extra level of talent that you're aware of above the base models. I just love that you don't need to be at 10/10 in this thing. You don't need to find some road in the middle of nowhere that you're 100% sure isn't being stalked by your local cops. This thing is just fun all the time, everywhere. Although, I really do wish this was a manual transmission, because I can't get all the DSG concerns out of my head. Actually, what are the stories with these mechanical concerns? Unfortunately, I can't talk about that because I'm not a qualified mechanic, but Jim can, because he is.
Now, a bit of housekeeping first. These actually have a timing belt, not a timing chain, and that timing belt is due every 105,000 Ks. And that timing belt also runs the water pump, which you would do at the same time. And also, thankfully, these have a far simpler and cheaper water pump than their later versions with the EA888. Yeah, these water pumps, cheap and good. The early versions of these engines occasionally have an issue with their fuel pump and the fuel pump actuator. That is something you can take out and check and actually change before it fails. They can have some issues with the turbo. Well, not so much the turbo, it's more the diverter valve. That's the valve that controls the boost. Pretty cheap and easy to change too. They can also have some issues with their PCV system, like every other Volkswagen. Sometimes when that leaks internally, it'll make a weird humming sound. If you take the dipstick out and the noise stops, you know you have a PCV problem, and you can just replace the diaphragm. And you know what? That's actually pretty much it. If they're well maintained and looked after, they are actually pretty good. However, the transmissions, yeah, not so much. Specifically the DSG transmissions. The manuals, not so bad, although they can have some dual mass flywheel issues, and the clutch can prematurely wear out, but that can be operator. But yeah, the DSG, there's some issues there. I mean, yes, they're clunky and they can be harsh when they're moving at slow speeds, but that's just the way they are. Doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with it. When there is something wrong with it, often you get some warning lights. Sometimes you just get no gear selection at all, or a whole bunch of horrible noises. Then you know you've got a problem. They can have some mechatronics issues, some accumulator issues, and some clutch issues. And often when they do have issues, it can be pretty expensive. Yes, servicing the DSG does help, but it's not going to guarantee you're not going to have any problems. Overall, with the engine and transmission, one of the biggest problems you might have is from the previous owner. Did they look after it? Did they drive it with a bit of mechanical sympathy? Because mechanical sympathy with these can go a long way. And mods too. Just make sure the mods have been done tastefully, and make sure you're not trying to get too much out of this thing. They are reliable to a point, but if you lean on them too hard, they will break. Now here's an idea too. Instead of just chasing more and more power, a huge improvement for these things is actually putting a good limited slip diff in them. That helps get what power you have to the ground and makes a huge difference, especially on track days.
But if you do still want one of these, how much do you need to budget? Well, currently here on the Aussie used market, the really cheapest examples kick off from around about 1,500 bucks. Geez, it's going to be an interesting condition for $1,500. Probably don't buy that one. The top mint condition examples like Concourse, like pretty much this car, they're under $20,000, around the 18 grand mark. And look, if it's had all the preventative maintenance done and has been owned by hopefully more mature owners and checks out with a full pre-purchase inspection, that's a really good amount of car for what they're asking. It is still a car that we'd only really recommend to hardcore motoring enthusiasts because like any performance car that's 20 years old, it is going to require its fair share of TLC. But if you do find a really great example like Jamie's here, you could be buying a future classic. But could the same be said for one of these? Also, need to say a massive thank you to all of the Mark V GTI owners groups that helped us put this video together. Honestly, some of the best owners groups we've come across, especially Angus Blythe, you bloody legend. You're the oracle of these things. Thanks, mate. I understand that all the newer iterations of Golf...
And it's not one of... Oh, f***ing hell.